Welcome to Math Reasoning with Candace, Courtney, Jamie, and Gary.
What is logic?
Logic. We use logical instruments, which are sets of facts or assumptions that support a conclusion, to change a person's positions, their beliefs, their thoughts, or ideas, or at least help them to understand the other person's position or concept.
Courtney, what was the purpose of the scale of the universe data? Can you recall what the smallest object that can be seen with the human eye is? How and why do you write large and small numbers in scientific notation? Why is measurement relative when looking at data?
The purpose of the scale of the universe data helps compare large and small objects of measurement. The smallest object that can be seen with the human eye is the human egg, and it reads in at negative to the negative fourth power. Large and small numbers are represented with exponents, and exponents represent how many times that number multiplies itself by the exponent. In higher levels of math, they help scholars to express astronomically large or minuscule numbers. Measurement is relative when understanding the measurement of objects being compared. So for instance, in this scale of the universe, all the data is being measured in the meter system. When using the exponents, when you see the human egg size, it is the unit of meters, just as the saguaro cactus reads at a higher measurement of 10 to the negative 2 power, but it's still in a meter unit. So that's why understanding the measurement is important, because you're reading them at a meter unit, but they're not, in meters, in relative, in actual size. So,
Jamie, how would you compare the heights of Army recruits to the heights of random mall shoppers?
Well, this is a great example to show standard deviation, which is a difference in data collected. We learned in this exercise that standard deviation in random mall shoppers' heights was drastically larger than that of Army recruits. This is because one set of data is coming from a specific group, whereas the other data collected is completely random. All of the Army recruits' heights stayed around the same, and the random mall shoppers' heights were varied.
What was the purpose of the small scale of the universe data? Can you recall what the smallest object that can be seen with the human eye is? How and why do you write large and small numbers in scientific notation? Why is measurement relative when looking at data?
well, Gary answered that question for Jamie already, so I'm going to answer question 2 about the Bell graph, which is okay. So we use this data to represent the normal distribution of hours slept in 217 Duke scholars. And with this type of data, you want to represent the normal deviation. You get that by finding the mean. And in this, the mean is 6.7 hours. The standard deviation or difference between the scholars, total sleep is 2.03. The graph makes it easy to see at a glance the amount of time those 217 scholars sleep. So they sleep between, a majority of them sleep between 4.6 and 8.73 hours, which is right here, and that's what's represented on the graph. My z-score for the majority falls in here between the 5 and 6 hours sleep. And that's in like the, see, Jamie's is right there too. So you use a Bell graph to represent the standard deviation. So Jamie, I'm going to find your question. So what is the relationship between standard deviation and the bell-shaped curve of a graph? And what is the relationship of the mean of the data and the bell-shaped curve of the graph?
We can look at the example of the bell-shaped curve graph that shows the sleep patterns of Duke University scholars. We see that this bell-shaped curve has a normal distribution, meaning the data is symmetrical and doesn't produce unusual values. Standard deviation determines the height and width of the bell. In other words, a large standard deviation would make the bell shape be short and wide, and a small standard deviation would make a tall and narrow curve-shaped bell. Now, the mean determines where the center of the bell shape will be. Both standard deviation and the mean of the data that is collected play a part in the shape of the bell that's in the graph.
Gary, can you list the parts of a bar chart?
The first bar chart, the title is very important because without it, no one will know what the chart is about. There is the x-axis and the y-axis, and the data that is contained in the chart. Then there is the legend, which tells us what each other bar represents.
According to the original numbers, through this one graph, the first graph, it tells us that she's away from them. A deceptive look at a whole actual value.
Courtney, what is the importance of setting y-axis facts in this example to better explain this to us? How would you apply what you have learned about misleading data in your risk?
Basically, 0 to represent a different part of that is represented. So it's real probably in primary areas will be and like alarming that this benchmark crime is just through here to custody at 0 it's like to other, you know, if you will, either higher or low more than others, careful to see at 0. So
Jamie, why would someone want to report bad data, and how can graphs be misleading?
Someone might want report bad data to make a product they're selling like more appealing to their consumers. A good example of this would be like tobacco companies not wanting to show how harmful their products can be. Graphs can be misleading by showing inaccurate differences in data that was collected. This can happen if the graphs were not scaled right. For example, if a pie chart is not grouped correctly or the vertical axis is started at a number bigger than 0, it could show that data that is farther or closer apart. Also, 3D graphs can be misleading to the eyes, so it's important to pay close attention when looking at charts or graphs.
Thank you.
Gary, what are some more ways that writers use misleading graphs to manipulate people?
Some writers leave out the baseline. They can manipulate the y-axis. Writers may only include certain data points to create a false impression of the data. Using the wrong kind of chart data also
Data. How is this related to math? Could you calculate how much time per month on an activity?
And then how much you have spent 1 week on that activity. Learning formula with C and 1, and then and that's more of data than, you know, seconds per month because there's be happy with.
like time. You went to manage the function more effectively. It can help you not stress behind it, help you have and school.
Yeah.
Into management of an organization, planning, benchmarking, investors, promote, and accrediting to audit this term, audit, and economic development.
Thank you. Three ways to use. You can use percentages to compare. Absolute difference is the actual difference between the compared and the relative value, and the relative difference absolute comparison is expressed as
How do you relate percentages?
The difference by the first decimal, by the death by one thing mathematics.
It is technique that can map to a solution. It can also be by looking at issues. You can also use this to share.
You know how we businesses.
You first need an investment of money. This probably this cost this and slowly made an increase.
Thank you.
Courtney, would you agree with actions that Elon Musk did in the early stages of his flamethrowing business? What choice would you have made once you started losing money? What evidence would you use to support your view?
Yes, I would agree with
You're a business.
Even though you appear to be you're actually traveling very fast, the Earth is always moving. Yet that is moving the rotation, Earth's orbit, the solar system, the intermediate, the Milky Way, the local groups. All these are part of body movements. When finding that even though you are moving at 5 miles per hour.
Why would you use a
well, because we're able to make the circles interlock or connect, so they can show the representation of those specifics, and that's why we use a Venn diagram. Courtney. Courtney, in what areas of life would you use a Venn diagram? If a patient has one health risk, does it mean will have another? What information did you use to find out the percentages of having obesity and type 2 diabetes?
The health industry would use these diagrams to relate data of cancers and diseases. The information in the Venn diagram allows that patient to see their risk of health problems. When looking at the diagram, we see that not all patients have 2 health problems simultaneously. To determine if one will have obesity with type 2 diabetes, we use the formula type 2 diabetes times obesity, but then we have to take that and subtract it from the total of type 2 diabetes, obesity, and high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells us that 90% of Americans have type 2 diabetes and obesity. The formula can be used in several different formats to calculate the probability of having one or more health issues. So, for instance, you could look at people who are going to have obesity and high blood pressure, because not everybody's going to have obesity and type 2 diabetes. And like Candace was saying, some of them will fall with all 3, and some might just have 1, and some might just have, like here, obesity and type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And so this just helps you look to see maybe what you might be more, predisposed to, and sometimes you can't even help that. It's just genetics. So Candace, thank you for helping us get into this section about Venn diagrams. Jamie, how would you apply what you learned to develop as a theory on if high blood pressure and diabetes are related to obesity?
Well, we learned, according to the data that was collected, obesity can be related to high blood pressure and diabetes. And this was proven by the Venn diagram that we had to make. Only 10 million Americans are only obese, but 52.5 million Americans are obese with high blood pressure. Only 0.3 million Americans have only type 2 diabetes, but 3.1 million are obese with type 2 diabetes. And 27.7 million are suffering from all three disorders. So we can infer that obesity could be linked to diabetes and high blood pressure. Also, depending on where you live in the United States, the chances of obesity could be greater, making the chances for type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure greater as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank y'all so much. This concludes our presentation on math reasoning for quantitative literacy. Ms. Benzie, we hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.